We're going to approach the development of our crowdfunding contract in the same exact fashion as how we approached the lottery contract. So we're going to first talk about the design of the contract. We'll then write out the contract in the Remix editor, and then we'll develop a React front end around that. So with that in mind, in this video, we're going to talk about the design of our crowdfunding or our campaign contract. I'm going to be using the term campaign and crowdfunding quite interchangeably throughout this entire series of videos. Whenever I say campaign, I'm talking about a project that we are trying to create to raise some money to build some product. So I'm going to say campaign, I'll say crowdfund, all meaning the same thing. In this diagram, I've listed out a bunch of the different variables and functions that I think that our contract is going to eventually need. This is going to be a first take on some of our different variables and functions. And what I mean by first take is that we might end up changing this design a little bit as we work through it. In particular, I'm going to tell you right now that the design of this approvers variable and this approve request function right here are going to change a little bit, because as soon as we start working on those, we're going to realize that they're going to run into a little issue. I know it's kind of annoying in a tutorial where we do things the wrong way, and then I say at the very end, oh yeah, well, we did things the wrong way here, and here's how you should do that. So I'm telling you right now that we're going to come back to this approvers variable after we implement it. We're going to point out one really big issue, and then we're going to refactor it to take a slightly different approach. The reason we're doing this, the reason I'm going to show you a bad way of doing things, is that this is something that I know you're going to run into on your own projects. So I want you to experience the problem that we're going to run into in a very natural fashion. All right, so with that in mind, let's talk about some of the different variables. Now, a lot of these variables will look very similar to the variables that we used inside of our lottery contract. And of course, we did that lottery contract before this one very much on purpose. So we're going to be borrowing a lot of code and a lot of ideas from the lottery contract because it is vaguely kind of a similar setup where we have people entering into some contract and they then belong to it or have some type of relationship to it. The first variable right here is going to look very familiar, the manager variable. This is going to store the address of the person who is managing this campaign. You can imagine this is the kind of idea person or the manager over here. It's the owner of the contract. It's the person who's trying to raise money to build some sort of product. This person is going to have an elevated status above all other people, and they're going to have access to methods that other people will not have access to, just like our lottery contract had that pick winner function. It will be of type address, and again, it's basically going to be the same thing as what we did on the lottery contract. The next variable is going to look very similar as well. This variable is going to be called minimum contribution. So the thought here is that in a real Kickstarter project, there are different tiers that you can donate to. A tier is speaking about the amount of money that you are contributing to the project. And if you donate more money, you qualify for a higher tier. If you donate only, say, $1, then you really don't get that much. But if you donate $90, well, then in this case, you get the actual product. So that's the idea behind this minimum contribution variable. This is going to be the minimum amount of money required to donate to the campaign to be marked as a true contributor. If you want to, you can certainly donate less money, but we're going to say that you have to donate at least minimum contribution in order to be considered a contributor to the campaign. Next is our approvers array. So this will be a list of the addresses for everyone who has donated money meeting that minimum contribution. We're calling this array right here approvers because this is going to be the people who approve requests. Technically, we can think of these as campaign contributors or people who have donated money, but as far as the contract goes, at the end of the day, they are really functioning as an approver for requests, and that's why we're going to call them an approver. If we look back at this diagram right here, the list of people down here, yeah, this would be our approvers. This is an array of addresses, and just like before on the lottery contract, we will enter in the address of everyone who enters in. Now, like I said at the start of this video, we are going to run into a big issue around this approvers array. So it's going to be a little thing that we're going to have to figure out, and of course we'll go into great detail. Again, we are going to end up refactoring this variable right here to be a slightly different type to store our addresses, but we'll get to that in due time. Next is the requests array. So this is what's going to store a list of requests that the manager has created. Remember, this is really the backbone of the entire contract. It's what enforces some amount of security. Anytime the manager wants to spend some money, they have to create a spending request. And the spending request is going to say, all right, I want to send maybe 10 ether over to this vendor, and this vendor is going to do some work for us to further along the campaign. The manager is going to probably want to make many different spending requests because they might want to send many different people some amount of money. So of course, we want to make sure that we have the ability to store a list of spending requests. Now the type of this variable, you'll notice that I marked it here as request and then the square braces. So this is going to be an array that contains variables of type request. And we'll go into good detail to explain exactly what that means. All right, now just a quick overview on some of these functions because I think you'll very quickly understand what they do. First off, we have the constructor function, which of course is named as campaign. This is going to set the minimum contribution and the owner on the contract when it's first created. We're going to have a contribute function. This is what very common people who want to donate to the campaign are going to call in order to donate some amount of money. So if you want to become an approver, you're going to call the contribute function and send in some money. And as long as that money meets the minimum contribution, then you will be marked as a contributor. The contribute function can be thought of as being very similar to the enter function that we put together a little bit ago on our lottery contract. Next up is create request. This is the function that a manager can call to create a spending request. And again, we'll go into good detail on discussing exactly what a request is. After a request has been created, contributors can then call a function named approve request to approve an individual spending request. So again, this would be very much like this case right here, where the manager has created a spending request and all the contributors have to essentially vote on a given request. Now, after a request has been approved, after it's gotten an appropriate number of votes, we're not going to immediately disperse the money. In other words, we're not going to immediately take the spending request right here and send the money inside of it to the vendor. So we're not going to just say, okay, well, enough people have voted yes, take the money and send it off to the vendor. In the real world, the manager might want to create a spending request and then make sure that it can get approved before they actually finalize terms with a given vendor. So just because everyone said, yeah, that's fine, go ahead and spend the money, maybe the manager is not quite ready to pull the trigger, so to speak, and send this money off to the vendor. So to accommodate for that type of situation, we're going to have a finalize request method. Finalize request will allow a manager to look at a finished request or a request that has gotten enough approvals. And once they call a finalize request, it will then take that thing and actually disperse the money or actually send it out to the particular vendor. So in short, the entire purpose of finalize request right here is to give the manager a little bit more flexibility on when the vendor actually gets paid. That's all. All right, so that's an overview of our campaign contract. I think in general, it's not going to be that bad. I think that we're going to get through it a-okay. The one thing to be aware of, again, is that this approvers variable right here is going to end up changing a little bit. And you'll notice I also put some exclamations next to approve request down here. Well, that's because when we change approvers, yeah, we're going to make a little change to approve request as well. All right, so with all that in mind, let's continue in the next video, and we're going to start working on this contract inside the Remix editor. So I'll see you in just a minute.